Before the 18th century, if you read a memoir, you were reading a carefully managed public relations campaign. Great men wrote autobiographies to sanitize their legacies, focusing strictly on military victories or political triumphs and actively erasing their personal failures. Jean-Jacques Rousseau decided to do exactly the opposite. In his book, The Confessions, he set out to present an unvarnished human life to the public, one that included his deepest insecurities and his most shameful mistakes. He structured this self-exposure using a specific logic he called a chain of sentiments. Instead of just listing dates and facts, he traced a chronological line through his emotional history, showing how intense feelings directly forged his later philosophies. To grasp the ideas that would reshape modern political thought, you have to look at the messy reality of the man who wrote them. His early life was defined by loss. Reading alongside his grieving father, they devoured heroic histories like Plutarch's Lives, filling his head with ideals of grand human potential. But these expectations hit a wall. He was thrust into a world demanding rigid, brutal conformity. As a teenager, he was apprenticed to a master engraver. To survive the daily beatings and abuse from his employer, Rousseau resorted to a baseline state of petty theft, lying, and evasion. After returning late one Sunday evening and finding the city gates locked, the fear of another severe beating pushed him to the edge. He abandoned his apprenticeship entirely and walked away from Geneva into the unknown as a fugitive. This collision between the noble heroes in his books and the abusive tyranny of his master created a deep, permanent resentment toward arbitrary authority. His wandering eventually brought him to the estate of an older woman named Madame de Warens. She took the teenage runaway in, providing a safe, stable haven from his previously chaotic existence. Protected by her patronage, he finally had the freedom to direct his own life. He immersed himself in the natural world, read philosophy, and taught himself music, slowly building his intellectual foundation. Over the years, their relationship evolved into a romantic one. But returning from a trip, he discovered she had taken on a new, younger lover. Devastated by the realization that he had been replaced, he chose to leave the only true home he had ever known. He spent his happiest days in the quiet countryside and experienced his deepest pain through a human relationship. These events solidified his belief that nature offers a pure sanctuary, while human attachments inevitably lead to betrayal. Rousseau eventually made his way to Paris. There, he navigated a rigid, status-obsessed intellectual high society that felt completely alien to his solitary, rural habits. He moved in with a young laundress named Teresa, and together they had 5 children. This period reveals a profound, dark paradox in his personal life. He systematically abandoned every single one of them. Shortly after birth, each newborn was left at the door of a public foundling hospital, an institution where infant mortality rates were notoriously high. He later tried to justify this decision by arguing he was too poor to raise them, even claiming he was acting in accordance with abstract ideals of state-run education, rather than accepting his paternal duty. The man who would shortly go on to write the definitive manual on raising and educating children had discarded his own offspring. In the summer of 1749, Rousseau was walking to Vincennes to visit a friend in prison. Along the dusty road, he casually read a magazine containing a prompt from the Academy of Dijon, asking whether the progress of the arts and sciences had purified human morals. Reading those words, he was seized by a sudden, dizzying clarity. He fell to the ground under a tree, so overwhelmed by the implications of the thought that he began to weep. In that moment, he saw his answer. Humans are born inherently good and free in their natural state, but the rigid, complex grids of modern society slowly constrict, corrupt, and warp them. This singular argument made him a literary sensation almost overnight. His essay was reprinted and debated across the continent, instantly pulling him from obscurity into the center of the European Enlightenment. This insight did not come from nowhere. It was the direct, inevitable synthesis of his life, drawing from his childhood abuse, his idyllic retreats in nature, and disdain for Parisian hypocrisy. His newfound fame came with immense pressure. As he rigidly committed himself to living out his ideal of radical truth, he refused to play by the polite, flattering rules of high society, quickly alienating the very people who had initially celebrated him. Isolated by his principles, his mind turned inward. He developed a deep paranoia, leading to bitter public ruptures with his closest intellectual friends, including prominent philosophers like Denis Diderot and Baron Grimm. He began to interpret every minor social slight or philosophical disagreement as evidence of a vast, coordinated conspiracy actively plotting to destroy him. He aimed his uncompromising honesty like a weapon against a corrupt society, but in the process, he dismantled his own personal support system. Things worsened when his later books openly attacked the foundations of traditional religion and government. Warrants were issued for his arrest, and he became a hunted fugitive once again. He fled France, was chased out of Geneva, and bounced from town to town. Eventually, he sought absolute physical separation from the world, taking refuge on a remote Swiss island in the middle of a lake. Here, completely alone and tormented by the conviction that his enemies were closing in, he continued to write his confessions, fully committed to laying his entire soul bare on the page. He documented his darkest hypocrisies right alongside his most profound insights. In doing so, Rousseau invented the modern autobiography, demonstrating that the philosophies which would later shape democratic states didn't come from a statue, but from the messy, unfiltered reality of a man.